calm down. Mama, I'm fine, don't worry. Go back out to sea, sail home, sweet home, where the ships must go to get all cleaned up and put away.
Hello, happy Friday. Welcome in everyone who's here for our live stream. I am Dakota. I'm from Galt Advocacy, and today we're going to be talking about some IHSS related matters, about paramedical services, about hearings, and about the release of information and how that can affect your ability to get paramedical services and other things as well. But thank you for being here. If you're watching this afterwards, I don't know. Thank you for watching. I don't think we have anything to announce right now. Teresa was just telling me that the governor's new budget proposal is probably going to be released pretty soon, if it hasn't already. So you can look forward to, we're going to do some research on that. We're going to try to figure out what the big takeaways are, and we'll probably do a live stream or at least a post about that pretty soon. So look forward to that. Today we're going to be talking about, actually I mentioned this before, but paramedical hearings, release of information. That's going to be our main topic for today. If you're here, say hi, drop us a like, share it with someone else you think might want to hear about this information. And leave me any comments about anything IHSS related. I mean, this is our main topic today, but if you have any other questions about IHSS, let us know, and I'll try and get to it, sometime near the end, or we can maybe reach out to you separately and answer any questions you have. Now, you'll have to bear with me today. This is my season. This is my allergy season. So I don't know about the rest of you, but as soon as the sun comes out, I'm probably allergic to the sun itself because I have just been sneezing and sniffling and whatnot nonstop. It's better now when I'm inside, but if my nose starts running and I start having to grab my tissues and everything, you have to forgive me. But yeah, so let's talk about our main topic here. Now I'm going to start with, and probably most of our time, we're going to talk about the paramedical form. This is something that there's a lot of debate to be had about what necessarily counts as paramedical, how much time you can get. There's always a lot of tension between the county and their nurses and the doctor who actually filled out the form. So I want to clear up things as much as I can and make it as clear as possible. And again, if you have questions about this as we're going through, let me know, put it in the comment section, and I'll try to address as many of them as I can. So as a very brief general overview of paramedical tasks are essentially things similar to hospital level nursing care, but they're things that you as a parent, as a IHSS provider, can do at home for your loved one. But they are things that require some level of instruction from a medical professional. That's where sort of the paramedical part comes in, where you need to be told how to do this before you did it for your child. There are a couple of common examples of things that some parents have to do that have overlap with other IHSS tasks, but are in this case paramedical. Like one is G-tube feeding. That it actually specifically says in the law that if a child only eats with a G-tube, then instead of giving time in feeding, all of their feeding time should go in paramedical instead, because it's kind of counts as a paramedical task. Before I get way into it, I'm going to briefly read the official designation of what counts as a paramedical task. So it's an activity the person would normally do for themselves, but they can't because of their limitations. An activity that is necessary to maintain their health. And C, this is the big one, An activity that is one of the following things: either includes the administration of medications, puncturing the skin, inserting a medical device into a body orifice, an activity requiring sterile procedures, or an other activity requiring judgment based on training given by a licensed healthcare professional. That is the main criteria for what is a paramedical task. Now, part of the other criteria is that it has to be something ordered by a physician, that like a physician has to say this needs to be done, and that's where the paramedical form comes in. We'll get to that. Fast, really quickly said, meant paramedical, like a gate trainer, etc. The equipment itself wouldn't be paramedical in the sense that IHSS wouldn't pay you an hourly rate to use it. But if the equipment is complicated in such a way that you need to receive instructions on how to use it on a person, and it fits that criteria we talked about, then it could be. Now, gate trainer, that might be more in line with rubbing skin, repositioning, and range of motion exercises, which is another kind of category that is like kind of aside from paramedical. But if there's something about the equipment that you have to be careful to not overdo it or to make sure that it's on just right, things like that, that could be considered paramedical because it requires judgment based on training given by a medical professional. But yeah, so that's the main criteria. If you have to inject it, if it's something that's invasive to the body, if you have to make sure everything is sterile and whatnot before you give it to them, those kind of things are paramedical. And it has to be ordered by a doctor. Now, this is where the form comes in. The SOC 321 is the paramedical form, where the doctor writes down their qualifications and everything and goes down the list of what task needs to be done, how long it takes, how frequently it needs to be done, and for how long. And for how long, I mean like long term, a year, 3 months, 5 years, forever, that kind of thing. And this is where there are two main things. One is making sure you get the time right, but two is that the doctor cannot order a task that is already a IHSS task, right? They cannot order feeding, they cannot order protective supervision, they cannot order, shopping for groceries. So it has to fit under that category of the paramedical, like the one I just read the list. And anything that they order that isn't in that list doesn't count as one of those categories, then the county can just ignore it. Pardon me. Like I said, allergies, they're getting the best of me. Do you have any good tips for avoiding allergies? I'd love to hear it. So that's the thing about the tasks they order has to fit within that category. Any ones that are not in that category, the county is free to just ignore those. As far as the time goes, this is where it can sometimes get a little bit confusing. They have all these columns on the form. So the first column is just what is the task. So let's say if you have like diabetes, then managing the insulin pump is oftentimes one of the tasks that goes on the paramedical form. So, replacing the pump, that's simple. That'll be one of the tasks of probably several tasks. And maybe the replacement itself takes, let's say, 10 minutes. It takes 5 minutes to remove one, take the new one, make sure it's all clean and everything, make sure that the part of the skin is all clean and sterile. And then you inject the new one, and then you check on your phone to make sure that it's working properly, it's connected, whatever, that kind of a thing. So let's say it takes 10 minutes. So the doctor would want to make sure, after in the first column, would just write replacing insulin pump. Second column is going to write 10 minutes because that's how long the actual process takes. And then the next column is the frequency, or sorry, the next two columns is the frequency. And it's going to be number of times per what. So it might say 2 times per month, or it might say 1 time per week, and that's in 2 separate columns. So X2 month, something along those lines. That's typically what you're going to see the doctor write in those columns. That's what they should write. And then the last column is where you get time period. So do they need it, forever? Oftentimes they'll just say go up to 1 year, because after a year, you're going to need a new form anyway. But that's the thing. A lot of doctors will write indefinite to say that this is a lifelong need, or that it's for as long as anyone can expect. There's no planned time when it's going to stop. Things like that. And so that's the basic outline of what you would expect to see on a paramedical form. I see there was a comment from Veronica, so I'm going to jump to that for a second, then we'll see if there's anything else about paramedical I want to say. I heard a comment from a mom that they reduced the hours because the mom mentioned to the social worker that she has a camera to watch her child. So they claimed the social worker told her that since she's watching her son, that's the reason he's reducing the protective supervision hours. Wow, that is odd. So let me read one more time and make sure that I understand what it is they are even saying that they're going to do. Mom's saying that they're reducing the hours, and you mentioned that reducing protective supervision hours because they said that she has a camera to watch her son, and said that that is odd. So I mean, I'm sorry to hear that, but it's such a weird reasoning for them to use. What I think they might be trying to get at is that one of two things. There are two things I've heard that are kind of similar to this. One is that they might be saying that because you have a camera there, you can keep an eye on him even when you're not in the home. So you're able to leave the home. You can go out and do your grocery shopping. You can go whatever, and you can just watch him on the camera. Therefore, you don't need to be there in the home with him. Now, that would be that's a crazy argument, of course, because so what? So what if I can watch him if I'm downtown and it's going to take me 10 minutes to drive back? So what? Like if I see on the camera that he elopes out the front door or hurts himself or something, then he can't intervene, right? He can't do anything about it. He elopes out the front door. By the time you get home, he could be long gone. Who knows where he'll be? So obviously that if that's what they're trying to say, that's crazy. The other possibility is maybe what they're saying is I had it. I mean, it also didn't make any sense, of course, but I had what I thought it could have been, that you're able to watch him. I mean, it could be that they're trying to say you're able to watch him while being in like a different room or a different part of the house. So you don't really need protective supervision because he's already safe because you're able to see him or something like that. But again, that kind of hits the same topic of doesn't actually protect him. That still is a form of protective supervision. Watching the person on the camera while you're in a different room, right? Well, they're in their bedroom, you're in the kitchen, but you can see and make sure that they're not, eating non-edible things, make sure they're not climbing out the window. That still is a form of protective supervision because you could go and you could intervene at any moment. That's the important thing, is that does this person have behaviors that they need someone to be present to intervene at any moment? Then they need protective supervision. No buts about it. So thank you for bringing that up. It's wild that the county is trying to do that. They should absolutely, get an advocate, get documents together, challenge that, because that's I don't even understand where the county's coming from there. It makes no sense, really. All right, getting back to our topic, we were talking about the paramedical form, how it's to be filled out. One other big thing about the time listed that can sometimes be debated is about wait time. So another bring up the G tube, right? So the G tube is another issue that's a fairly common occurrence for parents, especially, that whenever someone uses a G tube for feeding, that is considered part of the paramedical task. Now, what I'm getting at is about actively doing the task versus passively waiting. Now, I'm not an expert in exactly how G tubes work, so I don't know exactly if this is accurate. But let's say, just for example, if you need to, connect the tube, make sure it's all secure, make sure it's all clean, and then start the feeding process. But if from there on, if once the feeding has started, you don't need to do much. Either the recipient can do that part themselves, or you just need to wait for it to finish. And let's say it takes 20 minutes, right? During that 20 minutes, when you're just waiting for when you can do the next part, the county will not pay for that part of the task as paramedical. They will pay for these, and then after the 20 minutes, then you have to disconnect it, remove whatever part of it you remove, clean up the site, make sure it's all clean and sterile and whatnot. Maybe the setup takes 10 minutes, the cleanup takes 10 minutes, and there's 20 minutes of waiting. They're only going to pay you for the 10 before and the 10 after, and they want those to be listed as separate tasks on the paramedical form, because the standby wait time they don't pay for unless you are actively having to make adjustments, do something with your hands involved in it, or there's, again, going back to the diabetes thing, if you have to punch in numbers on your phone, if you have to watch the level and change it, then some of these things are active parts of the task. But if you are just, okay, I got to check in on this in an hour, then during that hour, they're not going to include that as part of the task. So that's the other big thing to remember about when the doctor fills out the form. Fast, he said, for my daughter, for example, they said that if it can be prevented, then protective supervision doesn't apply, which I don't believe. Sorry, get off topic. Oh no, it's totally fine. I always love talking about protective supervision. It's my bread and butter, right? So that is something that a lot of people will hear, and there is a level of truth to it, but it really only applies in very specific situations that probably don't apply to your daughter. So there is very specifically in the law, it does say that if precautions can be taken, modifications to the home that completely eliminate the danger and the need for protective supervision, then the person no longer qualifies and they can be taken off of protective supervision. So, one second. The issue with that is, because protective supervision in the first place is caused by a mental condition that causes them to not understand danger and the consequences of their actions, it's almost impossible to create a situation where they are 100% safe. If the person actually doesn't understand, what's dangerous and what isn't, then what can you possibly do to make them 100% safe all the time? Almost nothing. Now, you could say, and I wouldn't be surprised if some social workers have recommended this, well, soften, make sure there's nothing hard, nothing that they can choke on in their room, and then just keep them in their room all the time. I feel like I've pretty much heard this exact sentiment put forth. And for one thing, that's just describing a padded cell. That's not a way to live. And more importantly, it is specifically not allowed by law to have a non-self-directed person locked up in their home or locked up in a room. It's specifically disallowed according to the law. It says you cannot just lock someone in their home and call that a substitute for protective supervision. So, let me see the some of the follow-up comments. Hugo said, "I want to say thank you for explaining a lot of topics." You're welcome. I that's what I'm here for. Fast said, yes, that's what the judge even said during my first assessment appeal. Said that you should lock them up in their house, or that you weren't allowed to do that. I'm curious, but I'm here to tell you now. It's specifically written. I think it's ACL 1795, perhaps, and it's further expanded on in E Note 150 that says, no, if a person is non-self-directed, meaning they don't understand danger, they don't understand the consequence of their actions, you cannot just lock them in their room or lock them in a house and call it a day. That's not a substitute for protective supervision. It's specifically written into the law. So if the social worker or even the judge has been telling you, oh, just lock them up, then yeah, that's not fasted. The judge said, why are you still putting them around blank? Sorry, I don't want to laugh at your. I'm sure this has been really difficult, but what are we talking about? What are we talking about? Don't put them around blankets and stuff like that. If they can still suffocate, or she could roll herself into a situation that she could get herself out of. I'm sorry to hear you're going through that, because.
But this is Exhibit A of why the courts are not favorable.
Yes, Teresa said this is exactly why hearings have been so difficult, because judges so often they'll say whatever, as crazy as it may be. This is actually kind of leading into where I wanted to go with this topic, which is about the release of information and how these things affect your hearing. So really, to wrap up, paramedical has to be ordered by the doctor. It's best if it's the doctor who first told you to do the task. So if it's your endocrinologist who told you to deal with the diabetes, then it's best if they fill out the form. But if you can't reach them anymore, then some other doctor who is knowledgeable, who could explain to you how to do those tasks and knows that those tasks are necessary, is acceptable. But best practice is if it's the doctor who originally ordered the tasks to be done. Now, this kind of leads into the release of information. That's what the ROI stands for. The release of information is something we talk about very often, but in regards to paramedical forms, this is where I've seen some of the worst examples of counties abusing the release of information to get what they want. In one instance, it was really bad. We went back and forth with the county several times over the release of information. This was a client who had paramedical services, and quite a lot of paramedical services. I think there was both a diabetes issue and a mental issue. They had a is it a shunt? Is that the thing in the brain for strokes or seizures?
Shunt is for when there's pressure and it needs to
Okay.
remove
And so there were several issues like that. And for several years, they'd had paramedical services, quite a lot of them, probably in the realm of like 100 a month, something along those lines, because there were several daily activities that took a couple of hours. And then one year they came out, the county did their normal assessment, just like always. This was before they had an advocate like us involved. And they signed the release of information, as they had every year, but it was a new social worker. And that social worker, I think, either was also a public health nurse, or they brought a public health nurse with. And that person looked at their paramedical form and said, nah, this isn't necessary. They don't need all that. So without telling the client, without telling the recipient or the provider, they took the release of information, they took the paramedical form, they went to the doctor, and they sent a cover letter to the doctor that said, hello, doctor, we need this paramedical form filled out. and it should look like this. And they filled out their own copy with the tasks, and they said, hey, this place where you said 20 minutes, it should actually say 3 minutes. And this one where you said an hour, it should actually say 5 minutes. And they filled it out themselves and sent it to the doctor and said, fill out this paramedical form. And the doctor, to his credit, the doctor didn't follow their advice. That's how they put it. They said, oh, this is our advice on how long it should take. The doctor said, no, that's not how long it takes. And he wrote down the same thing he wrote down the previous year. 20 minutes, an hour, 30 minutes, whatever it was for all those different tasks. Send it back to the county. The county received the new paramedical form that was in line with the old one. And they said, nah, we're not going to accept this. So they went back to that doctor again, sent him another cover sheet and said, hey, you filled it out wrong. You need to do it like this. Here's our suggestion of how long it should take. And the doctor this time went, fine, I'll fill it out the way you want, and wrote it, basically copied their form exactly. 3 minutes, 5 minutes, 5 minutes. And sent it back. And this time the county went, all right, this paramedical form is acceptable. We can use this. And then they submitted it. And all of a sudden, again, all of this had been happening behind the provider's back, behind the recipient's back. They got the paramedical, they got their notice of action and found out that their paramedical hours had dropped by 95%. They're like, what in the world? How did this happen? We've had the same number of paramedical hours for 5 years, and now it just got dropped by 90 hours, or something like that. They're like, this is insane. And there was this whole back and forth. They went back to the doctor a third time and said, what happened? Why did all the hours drop? Got another paramedical form that went back to the old number of hours. In fact, he even added some tasks that they had started doing that hadn't been included on the previous paramedical form. Submitted that to the county. The county went back and got a fourth paramedical form. And it was after that point that we got involved and we said, rescind the release of information. Don't let them have that release of information, because they're just going to keep doing this to you over and over and over again. And so we got to the point of going into a hearing before a judge. And now we've got 5 if you include the one from the previous year, 4 brand new paramedical forms, all from the same doctor, that go back and forth, flip flop of 100 hours, 5 hours, 110 hours, 5 hours, back and forth. And we were like, what in the world can we even do with this? How can the same doctor come to 4 different conclusions within the span of 3 months? And this was a problem because the judge essentially decided, well, I'll go with whatever one's most recent. And at that point, the most recent one was from the county. And the judge was like, well, I don't know. We'll just do this. Now, that was that judge's decision. I quite expect that a different judge would have made a completely different decision with completely different logic. But this one in particular decided, well, this one's the most recent, so we'll go with that. But this is just one example of why we do not ever recommend signing the release of information at the assessment. Now, that's a paramedical issue. What we hear more often, perhaps, is you sign the release of information and then the SOC 821 gets filled out and it says moderate down the board. Or they go and they get an IEP from the school that you didn't really want to give because it wasn't very good. That's a more typical outcome of the release of information. Although there is also the possibility that with the release of information, the county could go to the school and spend the day in the classroom with your child with a clipboard and a pen, writing down everything they do the whole day. In fact, I've had social workers even say that they're going to do that as a selling point for the release of information, saying, don't you want to sign this release so that I can go to your child's school and sit in the back of the classroom and write down everything they do? Personally, we're not really a fan of that idea. And so we generally advise people not to sign the release of information. However, there is a caveat. And the caveat is, if you do not provide a release of information, then it is on you to provide whatever documents are necessary. Now, in most cases, this isn't a problem because you've already done most of the legwork. You've already provided a bunch of documents to the county already. But this is something that sometimes is an issue for people, that if you can't get in touch with your doctor, or there's a bunch of documents that's hard for you to get to, sometimes it's easier to do the release of information. But if you're going after anything big like protective supervision, a large amount of paramedical hours, or just a large number of hours, exceptional need, things like that, then we don't generally advise getting the release of information, signing the release of information. All right, before I get to the last topic, I'm going to jump to the comment section here real quick. Hugo said, twin girls with Rett syndrome, and I'm only getting 14 hours per month per girl. They're 4 years old. They can't speak, non-purposely hand usage, can't walk, can't sit, don't have balance. Well, there are two. Oh, yeah, let me see. You said they need help with everything. I want mommy to stay home, but she won't be able to carry them wheelchair. Well, what I'll say is that there are two sides to this. On one hand, paramedical services may be the route to go. Say you're only getting 14 hours per month, because it sounds like a really large amount of physical limitations. Now, it sounds like there's mental as well, and that's where you want to look into protective supervision. But the issue with at 4 years old, if you don't get paramedical level needs and you don't have protective supervision, there aren't a lot of categories that the county will really consider. Because at 4 years old, they're only going to consider respiration, bowel and bladder care, and pretty much paramedical level needs. Again, let me go over the list again if anyone missed it. Paramedical tasks, I mean, obviously they have to be necessary, right? They're necessary and they're ordered by a doctor, and they hit one of these criteria. One, administering medications, and this is specifically if it's beyond just giving them a pill. If you have to put it in their mouth for them, if you have to crush it up, if you have to inject it, administering medications is paramedical. Two, puncturing the skin, inserting a medical device into a body orifice, activities requiring sterile procedures, or other activities requiring judgment based on training given by a licensed healthcare professional. So if you have parts of their tasks of daily living that require some invasive procedures, you have to sterilize areas of the body, you have to sterilize the devices you're using, or it required training from a medical professional, then this could count as a paramedical task. And you mentioned recently diagnosed with intellectual disability. You can absolutely also push for protective supervision, but the most important part is that they have to do things that place themselves in danger. Now, you mentioned they can't walk or sit or things like that. They might be considered too physically impaired to place themselves in danger. But there are ways to even small amounts of bodily limb usage can qualify you for protective supervision, but it is something to consider. All right, let me get into the last part of this topic, which is about hearings. Specifically, what of these how do these documents, how does the release of information, the paramedical form, how does this affect your chances in a hearing? And what are we looking for? So the big takeaway is that if your documents aren't all aligned with each other, then oftentimes judges will just throw out whatever they want to. And sorry, again, my allergies are just killing me right now. We have seen time after time that we can have a pretty good case. We'll have a letter from this person that mentions elopement. We'll have a letter from this person that mentions headbanging, and we'll have, in the IEP, it doesn't quite say them by name, but it does mention that they have some difficulty with safety awareness here and there. And we've got a hazard log that just mentions thing after thing. There's just so many things on there. And what we run into so often is the judge will look at these documents and say, well, your hazard log mentions a whole bunch of things. However, this letter that mentioned the elopement didn't mention the headbanging, so I don't think the headbanging happens. This letter that mentioned the headbanging didn't mention the elopement, so I don't think the elopement happens. And the IEP didn't mention either of them, so I don't think anything happens. So you will get these situations where the judges will choose whatever document they want and say, this one doesn't mention X, Y, or Z. So every document that does mention X, Y, or Z is not to be trusted. Now, that's kind of extreme, but we have seen that exact situation happen. The most extreme version I've ever seen was we had documents that were all in agreement. We had the hazard log, elopes multiple times a day. We had the IPP, the regional center. The regional center said elopes at least once a day, probably multiple times. We had letters from people. Yep, we see him elope all the time. We had everything. Everything was in agreement, every single document. And you got to the IEP. And we talked often about how the IEP is so much of a problem. But the IEP said he elopes from the classroom. Great. Every document's in agreement that he elopes. But the judge said, again, this is why hearings have been so difficult for families. The judge said, the IEP, it did say he elopes, but it didn't say how often. So I have to assume, this is what the judge, it's bothered me for years now. Judge said that they have to go with what the IEP said instead of what all the other documents said. Now, mind you, the IEP didn't say how often he elopes. It just said he does elope. But the judge inserted into the text that it must not be very often and decided that the elopement was infrequent and therefore not worthy of protective supervision. So this is the kind of things that we run into. And this is why we say your documents have to be pristine. Like, we want every single document to mention every single behavior and to say that it happens often. And anything that doesn't align with the point you're trying to make, don't bother with it. Now, this isn't to say that every single letter, every single document has to be an essay. But when you're going into the hearing, have a plan ahead of time of what is the big deal, right? Because you have a lot of issues, when you have a child with autism or Down syndrome or a combination of them, there are probably a lot of things. You got poop smearing issues that you're concerned about. You've got, yelling and screaming and running around and smashing plates and breaking chairs and all kinds of things. You've got, when they're at school, they're disruptive. They're getting into fights. When they're, on the bus, they keep running around. But you need to keep in mind, what is the behavior that's going to get them protective supervision? Because most of those behaviors are not going to guarantee it, right? They're not going to qualify you for protective supervision. Protective supervision's for things that put them in danger that can happen anywhere at any time. Most importantly, that can happen at home. So you need, what are the things that happen inside the home that are actually actively dangerous to them? Because a lot of judges will say, sorry, them eating poop, that's, it's maybe dangerous in the future, but it's not immediately dangerous, which we take issue with, but that's what they say. So it's going to be things, self-injurious behaviors. Eloping, if they don't know where they're going, they can't, cross street safely and they won't be able to find their way back. Eloping is another big one. So self-injurious behavior, eloping, eating non-edible things, if they have a tendency of smacking into things accidentally, tripping, falling, hitting their head, falling down the stairs, things like these are in the home, actively dangerous. And so once you've identified what is the main thing, is it them pulling their hair out, they punch themselves, they poking themselves in their eye, and they're going to, gouge out their eyes accidentally. Figure out what the main concerns are that are going to cinch protect supervision, and make sure that your documents all point to that. That's your thesis statement, and you want every single document to support that concept. So that's the main thing I want to say about hearings, and that's why, especially talking about when we're talking about the release of information, if you give the county the option to just get whatever documents they want, get them rewritten how they want, then as soon as there's a conflict and it's like, well, this SOC 821 from the doctor mentions eloping and headbanging and pica, but this one just says that, this one says moderate and says he's got, average judgment for his age. Well, 10 times out of 10, maybe 9 times out of 10, the judge is going to say, well, I'm going to believe the one that says that he's moderate. Why? Because they just decide to do that. All right. We're wrapping up here. I'm going to jump. I see there's another comment. I'll get to that. And then if there's any more comments, I'm pretty much done with the main topic. So if you have any comments about this topic we've been talking about or any other IHSS related things, let me know, because we have about 5 or 10 minutes left. So Jessica, you said off topic. Appreciate you just letting me know. Will IHSS and regional center sharing info start causing loss of hours for autism families? If so, how would we advocate for our kiddo? Have y'all already done a live about it to go back to? Is this specifically about a new thing? Like, are they sharing? If you have more context for this, I'd appreciate it. Is this like a new law that they're now sharing more info with the government? I mean, they are the government. The IHSS is at least a aspect of the government. If to talk about what we're talking about, release of information, I mean, yes, if IHSS can receive information from other sources that can give them the impression that there's no longer a need for hours, that could affect your hours. I don't think IHSS sharing your information with other people, I don't think that would cause a loss of hours, but that sounds like there'd be privacy concerns aside from that. Stella,
to do with respite?
about respite? What about respite?
Well, could it have to do with respite and IHSS hours? Is that what they're sharing? Is that so that they don't overlap?
Perhaps. Let me see what Estelle is saying, and then I will tackle that if that's what is being talked about. Stella said DDS will be sharing this information. Again, I'm sorry, I might be losing the context of what this information is. What Teresa said was, if IHS and RC will be communicating with each other about your IHS hours and your respite hours, then I don't foresee you losing anything in terms of IHSS for that. Frankly, I don't think you should be losing hours either way, because no matter how much IHSS you have, there is still time left over that IHSS isn't covering, and respite is supposed to be for you as the parent to be able to rest a bit, as Myra would say. And so as long as there's still hours in the day that you have to care for your child, then there's hours a day that you could be using respite. Oh, okay. So thank you for this. So moms are getting emails from DDS saying the IHS is now sharing info with regional center. Interesting. So we've talked about this before, that regional center is the payer of last resort. And essentially what that means is that regional center is going to ensure that you are exhausting all other resources you have at your disposal before they will pay for anything, right? So they want to make sure that the school, whatever services the school offers, that's being used. Whatever services IHSS offers, that's being used. Anything else They want to make sure that all of that's being used before they step in and pay for things themselves. Now, in terms of IHSS hours versus respite, if they tell you there's a conflict there, I would disagree with that, because the IHSS hours are time for you as the parent or as the provider to do tasks of daily living for your child. And the respite time is for you as the parent to not have to take care of your child and to let someone else take that time for you for a bit while you can rest. So, like I said, as long as there are hours left in the day, I believe you should still be getting your respite time, even with IHSS. I don't think there really should be any conflict there. Now, if Regional Center is already offering you other services that are similar to IHSS, and you're claiming both, but there isn't enough time to claim both or something like that, I don't know if that could affect things. Amanda follows up with, what about personal assistance? Would that now affect IHSS? I mean, I think in many ways that kind of hits the same reasoning. As far as I know, I was pretty sure that a lot of regional centers were aware to some extent of your IHSS, and I don't really think them sharing this information. I mean, again,
No, they just want to make sure you're using all of your IHSS available at first.
Yeah.
And then need personal assistant and stuff.
I would say either way, whether it's IHSS sharing their information with Regional Center or Regional Center sharing their information with IHSS, as long as you're actually claiming hours that you're working already, like as long as you're already claiming hours that you are actually working, you should be fine. I don't think anything's going to change, because because IHSS doesn't pay for 24-hour care. Even if you have protective supervision, IHSS doesn't pay for 24-hour care. They pay for about 10 hours. I think protective supervision itself only covers 9 hours of the day. So if you as the provider, you work 9 hours of protective supervision and some other person works another 5 hours of personal assistance in a day, which is probably a lot, and then the child's asleep for 8 hours, you're still fine, right? You're still well within your rights as a provider. Sorry, my allergies going crazy.
No, we'll do a blog. We'll do a live.
Yes, Teresa, if you didn't hear her, since there seems to be a lot of questions about this, and I was kind of did not even realize this is a new thing they're doing. We'll probably research it more and see if there's any evidence that it is being used against families, and do a follow-up on it, either a blog or maybe sometime down the line we'll do a video or a live about it. Let me see. Amanda says RC knows about IHSS and how many hours my child gets because of this new rule, or already that was just how it worked. And then Jessica said, from my understanding, Regional Center are using this to lower SDP budget, affecting personal assistance and respite hours. Okay, well, we'll have to look into it, because, and again, this is a situation where I believe it shouldn't affect it, because that's how I think these programs should work together. But how it's actually being used could be a whole different story. All right, fast. I'll get to this one, and then we'll be wrapping up here so that we'll have time for Meyer to do the Spanish live. I feel like an advocate would be a huge help, especially because it's just me trying to figure all this out. I've spoken with Tina at Galt, but to be honest, I'm not comfortable with sending all docs first. You know what? Understandable. I don't know. I'm not involved in our intake process and all of what we're doing nowadays, but we've got we do have a lot of people that come to us, and so we try our best to figure out which ones we can or cannot help right from the start. But we're not the only advocate agency, and some others will do it for free if you're able to, if they have the time and you get into them. But absolutely, especially with some of the things you mentioned about the difficulty you had with the judges, with the counties, one way or another, whether it's with us or not, I do think an advocate would be a huge help. And yeah, always, if you want to come back, we're here every Friday. And even if the comments are sometimes not quite on the topic we're talking about, I like going over whatever people actually have on their mind. I'd much rather do Q&A every single week than actually talk about a topic if nobody cares about it, But we still are doing our topics, of course. But I enjoy getting to people's comments. Apologies, some of the comments are hard to read. I only get a few characters to try, and you always say that before it cuts me off. Totally understandable. I get it. And me and Caleb and all the advocates here, we're really good at figuring out what it's about, All right. Well, we're about wrapping up. I see Myra is waiting in the wings, so we're gonna end right here. Thank you so much, all of you, for being here. Again, do we have anything to announce? We don't have anything coming up, do we?
I think Myra, the boss, is going to be on next week.
Oh, okay. I'll double check that, but we think that Myra Galt of Galt Advocacy is going to be doing a live stream next week, probably.
Yeah, she's on the schedule. She's going to talk about some of her favorite info from the seminar.
All right. She'll be talking about some of the stuff from the seminar, her favorite things to bring up. So look forward to that. Let people know about it. And we will see y'all next time. All right. Have a good Friday.